Good Friday afternoon to you. Welcome to the Jon Sanchez Show on News Talk 780 KOH. It's a pleasure to be with you. And what a day it has been on Wall Street. I hope you are tuning in with all ears and you're telling your friends and your family about it because, folks, it was a big day on Wall Street today. No one knew today was going to happen from the big news of the day. The Supreme Court decision regarding President Trump's tariffs. He lost. Supreme Court ruled against him 6-3. Said, nope, you cannot have these tariffs the way that you set them up. Nope, it's illegal. 3 Republicans voted in his favor. 6 Democrats voted against him. This, of course, comes under the International Emergency Economics Power Act, is how he launched those tariffs back on, what was it, April 3rd, April 4th, right around there? Supreme Court says he does not have the authority to impose tariffs. If that wasn't enough, then the president came out at his news conference, which was about 3 hours after the news came out. And he said, fine, I'm going to impose a new 10% global tariff. That's right. We have a brand new tariff now. But folks, this thing is a nasty, tangled spider web. There are so many moving parts to it. I'll be honest with you. I had no idea how this market was going to react to the news. It shot up a little bit when the news came out. Then the market tanked. And then it came back and we finished very strongly today. But why? Well, the reasons are very strong on both the pros and the cons of this Supreme Court decision. Some of them favor the business. Some of them favor the consumer. Others are like, oh, this is going to be a disaster because, oh, by the way, as I'll cover, the U.S. government's collected over $300 billion in tariffs. Economists are saying $170 billion of this money is going to have to be returned to corporate America. Trump back in January said this will be, quote, hell for the U.S. economy if we lose the Supreme Court case. Then the Trump administration comes out and says, you know what, we're going to have this thing tied up in court for probably the next 5 years. But that didn't stop over 100 corporations from filing lawsuits up to this point, just in case today actually happened. They want their money back. I'll give you a little bit of a tidbit. One company that I did some research on, our dear friends over at Apple, they have spent out of their own pocket $3 billion. To be exact, it was about 3.3 of their own money. And now they want to get it back. Costco, I believe, was one of the first companies to file the lawsuit. This was, I think, towards the end of last year, if I remember correctly. So what a mess we find ourselves in. But all we care about is the market reaction, right? That's all I care about. I want the market to go up to help you. And boy, did you get that today. But can it last? That's the big issue that we're trying to figure out. Was this a short cover rally? Who knows? But I'll share with you one story among many that I'm going to be going over with you as we get into the great details about what happened today. And that is, what was the president's reaction? He was sitting in the White House at a governor's meeting, breakfast meeting, early. He was sitting there talking with the various governors, of course, from both sides of the aisle. And his aide hands him a note. It says, we lost. Or let me back up. The note said, Supreme Court ruled against us. And he turns to the aide and says, we lost? Aide says, yes. He immediately put an abrupt end to the meeting with the governors, stormed out. And those in the meeting said he was absolutely furious. As you would imagine, storms out, gathers with his team for the next 3 hours, and decides what to do. And when all that was going on, when the White House comes out and says, okay, we're going to have a press conference at 7:45 Pacific Standard Time, markets are just like, oh my God, what's going to happen here? And then the president came out, and we've got some sound clips for you that we're going to share throughout the show talking about this. But folks, this was a major blow to the president. But as we all knew, we've talked about this for a long period of time since this case has gone to the Supreme Court, that they have a backup plan. And the president said today, not only this new 10% global tariff, but also there's many other plans that he's going to be looking at. So he's not going to go down without a fight. We know that. But it was a major, major blow to the Trump administration. So I want to kind of start things off with you. Let me tell you how this market finished up, just so you kind of have that side of it. You can breathe a sigh of relief because, like I said, this thing could have gone either direction. We finished with a gain of 231 on the Dow, closing at 49,625, of 0.47% rise. Nasdaq gained 203 points, 0.90%, closing at 22,886. and the S&P rising 47 points, 0.69% to close at 6,000. On the commodity side, 7-cent gain on oil, finished at $66.49 a barrel. Gold up $82.90, $5,079.96 an ounce. And the bond market, well, it was up and down and all over the place with this going on, but finished only with a 1 basis point increase. So there was no concern, no flight to quality. Yield closed 409 for the week. The 10-year Treasury was up 3 basis points for the entire week. Now, let me kind of start with this whole situation, which is what actually happened today. So once again, this has been a situation that has been with the Supreme Court for quite some time. No one knew exactly when the Supreme Court was going to rule on this. But let's go into the details. The Supreme Court struck down the global tariffs. They ruled that the president exceeded his power when he imposed them by using that 1977 law, the International Emergency Economic Power, or what they call IEEPA, I-E-E-P-A. This allows the president to take action to regulate the economy during emergencies. So remember, let's go back to April. When he imposed the tariffs, right, the Liberation Day, and everyone said, wait a minute here. Is this really an emergency? Is this an economic emergency? And then remember, the market tanked on that for a few days. Supreme Court said, nope, you can't do that. What was the Supreme Court's reasoning? Well, the majority of justices, like I said, 3 conservatives, 3 liberals. I'm sorry, I was thinking 6 and 3, but yeah, it was 3 and 3. 3 conservatives, 3 liberals said Trump went too far in enacting his most sweeping tariffs. He had no authorization from Congress. Remember, Trump has said all along, I don't need Congress's authority. I can do it myself. I'm the president. Well, Supreme Court says differently. What tariffs have been struck down in this new Supreme Court ruling? Well, the levies voided by the decision include some baseline tariffs of 10% on virtually every country in the world. And if I have time, I'll love to share with you a list of the countries that are now going, boy, this is going to be nice not having these tariffs against us. So again, 10% baseline tariff, which was ruled out today, virtually every country in the world, as well as, of course, as we know, steeper tariffs on countries the administration deemed as bad actors on trade. Now, the White House used the same authority to impose a set of tariffs specifically, for where you remember, on Mexico, on Canada, and on China. Saying, of course, those countries are responsible for the flow of illegal fentanyl into the U.S. This Supreme Court decision today, those tariffs were voided. Now, tariffs imposed under other legal authorities, because remember, it's not just that 1977 act. There's all other types of tariffs under different acts. Those were not affected. What does this mean for businesses, and what does it mean for you, the consumer? In regards to, hey, am I going to get a refund? Well, again, as the president said back in January, this will be hell for the economy if we have to start rebating a bunch of money. Well, what was very interesting in this ruling was that the ruling did not directly address whether the government will have to pay back the tariff revenue it has already collected. As I said just a few moments ago, companies have already filed hundreds of protective lawsuits trying to preserve their ability to get a claim refund from the government for these tariffs that they've paid. Now, remember, what was this case all about? Let's kind of go back to the basics. How did this thing end up in the Supreme Court? Well, the small businesses challenging the levies under this administration basically said to the Supreme Court, look, no president before President Trump has ever understood IEEPA to permit tariffs, and certainly not on the scale that he imposed them. They pointed out that the world of tariffs doesn't appear in the law, or the word, doesn't appear in the law. And they argued that a natural reading of the statute didn't seem to suggest the president could impose unilateral taxes on imports. Now, one of the central arguments was that the power to tax imports belongs entirely to Congress and has since the earliest days of the Republic. Now, which justices voted to void the tariffs? Which ones voted to uphold? Well, the majority included 3 conservative justices, Chief Justice John Roberts, along with Justice Neil Gorsuch and Amy Coney Barrett, all 3 liberals. Justices Elana Kagan, Sonia Sotomayor, and Kenton Brown Jones Jackson. The 3 other conservative justices that dissented, and boy, did Trump praise these in his press release or his press conference. Clarence Thomas dissented, meaning sided with the president. Samuel Alito, and of course, Brett Kavanaugh. Now, what did Chief Justice John Roberts' majority opinion say? Well, Roberts rejected the White House's view of the president's power to unilaterally impose unbounded tariffs and change them at will, adding, that view would represent a transformative expansion of the president's authority over tariff policy. In light of the breadth, history, and constitutional context of that asserted authority, he must identify clear congressional authorization to exert it. That's what Roberts wrote. The EPA law, quote, falls short. Real quickly before we go to break, what did Kavanaugh have to say about it? He said tariffs are a traditional and common tool to regulate importation. The EPA law, he said, merely allows the president to impose tariffs somewhat more efficiently to deal with the foreign threats during national emergencies. Now remember, Kavanaugh is only one of the Trump's 3 appointees on the Supreme Court to have ruled in favor of his tariffs. The distinction the president applauded, and oh my goodness, did he praise Kavanaugh. Oh my goodness, just on and on and on. Now, when we come back, let's talk about what are the president's options now that the Supreme Court has ruled against him. And again, we're going to get into, as the show progresses, what does this really mean for you and I as a consumer, for investors, etc. Let's turn it over to Kristen Snow. She's in the Right Now Traffic Center. Hello, Kristen.
Today, I will sign an order to impose a 10% global tariff under Section 122, over and above our normal tariffs already being charged. And we're also initiating several Section 301 and other investigations to protect our country from unfair trading practices of other countries and companies.
There's the president today at the news conference indicating what his other options are. Once again, if you just joined us, the Supreme Court ruled down against the president, saying these tariffs, a certain aspect of them. And again, I got to be really careful when we understand this. This is not all of the tariffs overall. This is basically the reciprocal 10% tariffs that he implemented after Liberation Day. Again, the small business community got together. They filed the courts. They went through the courts. The whole court system ended up in the Supreme Court this morning early. The Supreme Court ruled, nope, sorry, can't do it. It's illegal. The president does not have the power to impose these tariffs. So we're going to be going into more detail about, as you just heard in the audio clip, what options the president has. And then we're going to get into, in the second half of the show, how can this really impact you? What can you expect? What's going on? Could you potentially get a refund from the government? Don't hold your breath on that one, because they're saying even on the businesses that have spent, again, billions and billions of dollars, that it's going to take up to 5 years to get their money back, if and ever they do. But again, there's hundreds of lawsuits have already been filed in a preemptive fashion. Once again, the market reaction today was quite surprising, and I will continue to explain why the market did not sell off, because you could have really made a claim this market could have gone one way or the other. It really could have. But we finished with a gain of 231 on the Dow. NASDAQ rose at 203, and the S&P higher by 48. So let's go back to basically what we're looking at this point, as far as what are the president's options as he goes forward? And let's expand a little bit on what you just heard. So again, alongside the so-called reciprocal tariffs that he has imposed, there's a number of levies on industries, as we all know. Industries like automobile, like steel, like aluminum, copper, under a complete separate national security authority. And that's what the president just mentioned. It's called Section 232. That provides one obvious backstop for the administration to use now. But listen closely. Trump said he's going to impose this 10% tariff under a different authority to replace the levies, again, that the Supreme Court threw out today, over and above our normal tariffs already being charged. But here's the gist of it. This new tariff, this 10%, would be imposed under what's called Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974. That Trade Act allows for tariffs of up to, and this is really important you understand and listen to this, up to 15%. Now remember, he announced 10% today. We know his strategy. He starts low, and then if he doesn't get what he wants, he bumps up the tariffs. So I would not be surprised whatsoever, as he gets a chance over the weekend at Mar-a-Lago to ruminate on this. Again, he's got his hands full. Is he going to attack Iran this weekend, as many are predicting? There's a lot of things going on in Washington. But I would not be surprised if we find ourselves going from 10% global tariff to 15%. But here's what you're not hearing anywhere else. This Section 122, this new tariff that I just referred to, again, can go up to 15%. He's only doing 10%. It's only good for 150 days. And it was designed to address trade imbalances with other countries. Now, this 150 days, that would buy the president quite a bit of time to devise some individualized tariffs for each major trading partner under a different provision of the exact same law, Section 301, which is used to counter unfair foreign trade practices. So this is what we've talked about before as far as, quote, the backup plan that the president would have if indeed he lost this case. But like I said, he was very, very, very upset about it, as you would imagine. It was an embarrassment. There's no doubt. There's no way you can talk about it and not agree with that. I invite you to watch any news clips, YouTube, wherever it may be that you want to find the story, and you can see the anger on his face during this news conference. It was not a pretty scene. So where do we go from here? Well, he opened his remarks today. Let's kind of get into how he felt about the Supreme Court justices that voted against him. And he delivered a very, very harsh comment to the Supreme Court, saying, quote, he was ashamed of certain members and that some of the justices were frankly a disgrace to our nation. Again, 6-3 ruling. Matter of fact, let me let you hear this instead of me just telling you about it. Go ahead, Jay.
The Supreme Court's ruling on tariffs is deeply disappointing, and I'm ashamed of certain members of the court, absolutely ashamed, for not having the courage to do what's right for our country. I'd like to thank and congratulate Justices Thomas, Alito, and Kavanaugh for their strength and wisdom and love of our country, which is right now very proud of those justices. When you read the dissenting opinions, there's no way that anyone can argue against them. There's no way. Foreign countries that have been ripping us off for years are ecstatic. They're so happy. And they're dancing in the streets, but they won't be dancing for long, that I can assure you. The Democrats on the court are thrilled, but they will automatically vote no. They're an automatic no, just like in Congress. They're an automatic no. They're against anything that makes America strong, healthy, and great again. They also are a, frankly, disgrace to our nation, those justices.
You can hear the tone in his voice. Not a happy man by any means. But we know when he gets angry, he gets revengeful. And that's what I was saying. I would absolutely not be shocked if he bumps up that global tariff from 10% up to 15%. The last thing I want to mention before we go to break is, remember this, folks, the Supreme Court ruling did not dictate how the tariffs would be refunded. And when asked by the press corps about that, Trump said, quote, we'll end up being in court for the next 5 years in regards to refunding the money, if again, they're going to end up doing it. Over $300 billion so far has been collected. This also throws out the idea that he kind of teased the country with months ago, where everyone would get a $2,000 refund. Remember, that was supposed to come out of the tariff collected money pot. But we will see on that side of it. All right, when we come back, let's get more into detail about how's this going to impact you, impact the markets, talk about it from that standpoint. Let's turn it over to Jack Saban. He's got news, traffic, and weather. Hello, Jack. Back to the Jon Sanchez Show on News Talk 780 KOH. Happy Friday to all of you. And once again, please don't forget, you can find our show not only on KKOH.com, you can find it at SanchezGaunt.com, your favorite podcasting sites, and of course now on YouTube. Just search The Jon Sanchez Show. All right, what a day it was. If you just joined us, we had a major Supreme Court decision come our way early this morning. Again, it was a surprise to everyone. No one knew, even the president didn't know when the Supreme Court was going to make its ruling on the president's tariffs, portion of the tariffs, I should say. But the street brushed it aside. 231-point gain on the Dow. NASDAQ rose 204. The S&P higher by 48. Now we need to get down to what I care the most about. Not the government, but about you and your money. That's all I care about. So this is where things are going to get a little, let's say, spiderwebby, for lack of a better term, because this is a convoluted mess now that we find ourselves in. So just off the top of my head, let's kind of think about this for a second. I touched on over 200 lawsuits have been filed by corporate America to go get money back. As I said earlier, just using Apple as an example, they have spent out of their own pocket $3.3 billion. You know doggone well they're going to try to get that back. We know Costco's already filed the lawsuit. They did that, I believe, back in November. And so there's supposed to be hundreds of companies have already filed a lawsuit to get these refunds, right? We're talking substantial sums of money. Over $300 billion the government has collected on tariffs, of which about $176 billion is what the economists are estimating, if this court case happened the way that it did, would need to go back to corporate America. But remember, this was the interesting part about this whole decision. The decision did not indicate whatsoever about the refunds. And many are like, wait a minute, they kind of left this out. They should have, in their decision ruling the tariffs down, they should have said something about, government needs to refund this money or do something with it. But there's nothing. So that's why most feel, and I agree with this, that this thing is going to get drug out in courts for years upon years. And in the meantime, of course, the government will continue earning interest on that money and so on and so forth. Sincerely doubt, as I indicated earlier, that we're going to see our $2,000 refund as Trump kind of threw out as an idea a few months ago. I doubt that's going to happen because obviously they don't know what's going to happen when it's all said and done. But I know one thing I was going to start the show with. If there's ever a time I'd want to be an attorney, and it's not very often, it would be right now. Because I can tell you, there are going to be a whole bunch of attorneys that are going to make a whole bunch of money suing the government now, trying to get money back for their corporate clients and small business clients. No doubt in my mind on that. All right, let's talk about you, the consumer. What are the positives for you in this situation? Because by no means, and I hope I'm being really clear in my tone of my voice today, by no means am I saying this is a negative. Matter of fact, this may be, I'll be the first to tell you this, this may be one of the biggest gifts that the president has ever received. Now, why? Okay, the negative, of course, we saw in his actions today. He's embarrassed. He's upset. He'll retaliate in some form or fashion that none of us even know about. But here's why I think it could be a gift. What does the president want more than anything? He wants interest rates to come down, and he wants low inflation, okay? We didn't get that today. Today we had the release of the PCE, the personal consumption expenditure. That is the Fed's favorite measure of inflation. On a month-over-month basis, this is December's data, so you got to factor that in. Month-over-month, PCE up 0.4%. So November to December up 0.4%. Year-over-year, however, up 2.9%. Now, what's bad about that? The Fed wants that number to be down at 2%. So we're 0.9% higher than what the Fed wants. That means the Fed sat back today when they saw these PCE numbers, and of course we have January's coming up soon and so on and so forth, and just kick that can further down the road, meaning the interest rate cut can. We can't justify cutting interest rates again when PCE is at 2.9%. We want it at 2%. I did not see any new predictions as to now have we gone from the potential 3 interest rate cuts as the street expected leading up to today's court decision. Are we going to go back to 2? Are we going to go back to 1? Are we going to say, there were some today saying, you know what? After this PCE number and so on and so forth, we're not going to get any cuts this year. So who knows, right? It's day by day. But back to why I said this could be the biggest gift that the president wants. And here's why. All right. So here's where we sit. If these tariffs are not being collected, what are you and I going to benefit from? A lot more money in our pocket. So now I'm going to go down the path, assuming that he doesn't implement some of these other acts that I'd mentioned a moment ago. Let's say that, again, those are the 10% is now gone. So that means you and I, which we know tariffs act like a tax. I don't care what any government agency says, it is a tax. And you know what I love about this? Let me go off my soapbox or get on my soapbox for just a moment. We have been told and told and told by economists, by the government, and so on and so forth, oh, these tariffs, they're absorbed by corporate America. They're absorbed by everybody else. It's not going to affect you and I as a consumer. Well, BS. We all know things cost more these days. And you mean to tell me, and I'll pick on my wonderful friend, I shouldn't say friend, I don't know him, my wonderful company, Apple. Love them to death. Own so many of their products. Love them to death. But that $3.3 billion that they've collected, do you not think in some form or fashion that when I went out a couple months ago and I bought a new MacBook Pro, that I didn't pay a higher price because that new price had some tariffs mixed into it? Or the new iPhone that all of you are buying? Or any other Apple product? You don't think you paid more that contributed to that $3.3 billion that Apple has, quote, absorbed in tariffs? I disagree. Prove me wrong. Any company, corporation, et cetera, if any of you CFOs are listening, please give me a call. Love to have you on the show. 852-TALK. Because I don't agree with it. There is no way in heck that corporate America, big or small, is going to absorb these tariffs and just go, it's okay. We just lost X millions or hundreds of millions of dollars because we, out of our generosity in our heart, have now written a check to the Customs Department to pay those tariffs. No, they didn't. We know a lot of companies paid, let's just use an example, 10 cents on the widget for a tariff, and they're turning around charging us 15 or 20 cents. They look at it as a profit margin. Why do you think corporate America's the earnings are so strong right now? They're not absorbing all these tariffs. You and I are. So now if these tariffs go by the wayside, again, assumption, I'm probably wrong on this assumption, but it's fun to talk about, that this 10% tariff is going to go away. Guess what? That, quote, tax on imports that you and I are paying as a consumer, it's gone. Now we're going to see what have been these pressures on electronic prices, furniture prices. I mean, check the furniture and appliance stocks today. Many other goods, those prices should subside. The other BS that the government's tried to feed all of us is tariffs don't contribute to inflation. Really? Why is inflation up 2.9%, as I said? So here's the gift to President Trump. If these tariffs are no longer there, or a portion of them are no longer there, guess what? That makes inflation come down. Guess what? That means he gets his dream. Lower interest rates. He's got two things going for him now. He's got his own handpicked person, that's Kevin Marsh, that's going to come into the Fed as the Fed chairman in May when Powell steps aside, assuming Marsh gets confirmed by the Senate. So now he's got his guy in there. And now, no tariffs, inflation comes down. The rest of the members of the Federal Reserve, the Federal Open Market Committee, they can't argue to start cutting interest rates. So now the president gets what he wants. Sure, he likes having this big slush fund of $200 or $300 billion of the tariff money. But guess what? That's chump change compared to the amount of money that will come back into this economy because of the big, beautiful bill, and because you and I as a consumer will have less money have more money in our pocket because we're not paying these tariffs. So he can look real upset at the press conference and whatever you're going to read over the weekend, but just know deep down, this could be a really great time period for the president and his administration. Reduced inflationary pressures equal a Fed that cannot argue against starting to cut rates. So you see, you and I as a consumer, we can win them both ways. It's going to cost us less to go buy our favorite products. Secondly, we're going to have interest rates come down. So our mortgages, our car loans, our credit cards, everything that we use as a consumer, maybe those rates will come down if the Fed gets aggressive and starts cutting rates. So you see, it's never as bad as what you think. I'll continue on when we return. Let's wrap it up with Kristen Snow, right now, Traffic Center. Hello, my dear.
On the economy, the signature part of your economic plan is tariffs. The Supreme Court is going to hear arguments this week on whether you have the authority to impose these sweeping tariffs without congressional approval. The lower courts have ruled against you. That's why it's in the Supreme Court right now.
Very close rulings, yeah.
What happens to your economic plan if the Supreme Court invalidates your tariffs?
I think our country will be immeasurably hurt. I think our economy will go to hell. Look, because of tariffs, we have the highest stock market we've ever had. Because of tariffs, 401ks at the highest level, and this is millions and millions of people that we've ever had, 401ks. I think it's the most important subject discussed by the Supreme Court in 100 years.
There was a president on a 60 Minutes interview back in November, obviously right after the lower court ruled against the president. And then again, obviously it went to the Supreme Court. So let's see if that was just a threat by the president that the economy is going to go to hell, or maybe he's right. Only time will tell, won't it? But notice in that interview there, he didn't say anything about alternative plans. Didn't say anything about, hey, if I do lose, I'm immediately, within hours, going to throw in a new 10% global tariff. So you see, that's politics, folks. What is it you can really believe? I don't know. That's one of my biggest challenges in life. It's like, what do you believe? What do you believe? I want to get back to some of the positives and negatives of today's Supreme Court decision. But first, I want to throw this in because this was actually going to be one of my top topics of the show today, because this impacts all of us that buy gas or invest in oil companies, etc. President today said he is considering limited military action against Iran. Many are saying again that this could happen as early as this week. And remember, it was just a few days ago that his military cabinet said, Mr. President, we are going to be ready this weekend. There's a lot of speculation what's going to happen. Now, we didn't get much movement in oil prices today. That's what I mean. Kind of bizarre, especially obviously with it being a Friday. As I said earlier, oil only went up about 7 cents to 66.49 a barrel. But for the week, oil's up more than 5%. So we will see what's going to happen. He said, quote, I guess I can say I'm considering that, when asked by a reporter at a White House breakfast with the U.S. governors, meaning that was that breakfast this morning that I told you he abruptly ended, meaning, he's considering the military action. So like I said, we will see. there was some great information going around this morning on some of the major news sites in regards to how Iran has really rebuilt some of those major rocket silos and things that we destroyed months ago, so on and so forth. So many are saying this couldn't be a slam dunk. Others are saying it could be. We've got a huge contingency of military aircraft as well as ships and things right there in the area. I'm sure it could be a very swift type of situation. But again, what's got me interested is limited military action. So what does that really mean? It's anybody's guess. So that's the other thing we're going to continue to watch, of course, over the weekend. Now, let's go back to some of these positives and negatives. Okay, so I told you this could be one of the greatest gifts for the president because you and I have more money in our pocket, which, I know there's that other upside, which means, hey, we have more money, we're going to go spend. That could drive up inflation. But you can take the other side of it, which is, hey, you and I are going to have more money in our pocket. Maybe we're going to save. We're going to have big tax returns. Or I'm not, but I know many of you are, after the big, beautiful bill, so on and so forth. But let's kind of narrow this down to one of the negatives that I don't think a lot of people are talking about enough, and that is the impact on various U.S. industries. Now, at this press conference today that you've been hearing about, the president said he was, I believe, in Pennsylvania yesterday, and he was visiting a U.S. steel mill, smaller, not one of the major ones. And the CEO said, "Mr. President, I wish I could kiss you." And the president said, "No, don't you dare kiss me." He said, "But why do you want to kiss me?" And he said, "Because of you, because of tariffs, we were barely staying alive before you announced tariffs. We were down to a handful of employees." He said, "Now we are running 7 days a week, 2 shifts now, a third one coming here in a few weeks." The president said, "Hey, I noticed you got a brand new crane out there." He goes, "Yeah, thanks to you, Mr. President. Crane is a 100% write-off under the big, beautiful tax bill." So watch some of these certain domestic industries like steel, aluminum, etc. They may be hurt come Monday because, of course, now competition may come in from overseas. Story has just begun, folks. God bless. Thanks for sticking with me. I know it was a complicated day for a Friday, but we'll try to make sense of it again come Monday. Have a great week, and we'll see you on the Jon Sanchez Show.
Jon Sanchez is a registered investment advisor, and the opinions expressed by Sanchez Gaunt Capital Management, LLC on this show are their own and do not reflect the opinions of News Talk 780 or its parent company, Cumulus Media. All statements and opinions expressed are based upon information considered reliable, although it should not be relied upon as such. Any statements or opinions are subject to change without notice. Information presented is for educational purposes only and does not intend to make an offer or solicitation for the sale or purchase of any specific securities, investments, or investment strategies. Investments involve risk and, unless otherwise stated, are not guaranteed. Information expressed does not take into account your specific situation or objectives and is not intended as recommendations appropriate for any individual. Listeners are encouraged to seek advice from a qualified tax, legal, or investment advisor to determine whether any information presented may be suitable for their specific situation. Past performance is not indicative of future performance.